We've spoken to many of the candidates, and today we are speaking to Andy Street, who is the Conservative candidate. Good morning, Andy. Thank you for joining us here on Black Country Radio.
Yeah, good morning, Ian. Nice to be on with you and your listeners.
We hope to ask you some questions from our listeners. If anybody would like to ask a question of Andy, please head over to our Facebook page. We're streaming the conversation live there at the moment. But Andy, I always start my interviews with the most difficult question of all. At the end of this discussion, we're going to be playing a piece of music, and I'm going to ask you to choose that piece of music. I'm going to give you 15 minutes or so to think about it, but I'll be coming back to you with that question again.
Oh, I've already decided, Ian. Don't worry. I know
okay.
what I want. Yeah.
That's I hope we have it as well then.
You will.
So, Andy Street, thanks for joining us. First, before we kick off, tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, we know that you're the incumbent mayor, but what's your background?
Yeah, so with pleasure. So, of course, I have been mayor for the last 4 years, but I'm not a politician by training at all. So I hope I'm allowed to say this on Black Country Radio. I am a Brummie through and through. I'm getting the thumbs around that, but I have to admit that. But, a local person. But after school, university, I went off to John Lewis to work. So as probably many will know, I was lucky enough to work up from being on the shop floor to being the boss of John Lewis for 10 years. So business background. But then the position of mayor came and I thought, come on, Andy, you can give up your business. You've done that for long enough. 10 years is enough. And just maybe you've learned something in business that will be useful to the citizens of the West Midlands in terms of trying to improve our performance and outcomes and life chances. So I gave all that up and stood in an election 4 years ago, which no one gave me any chance of winning, because historically, as we know, we've had Labour leadership across the region. But I did win just by a whisker. And then the last 4 years, I've been trying to make good on promises and feel very strongly that we've made a good start, but there's a hell of a lot more to do, made more difficult by the pandemic. And that's why I'm offering myself again as candidate this time round.
And before we get into some of the challenging issues that you will face, predominantly because of the pandemic, we are facing difficulties. Neil from Howell's Own has already been in touch. He'd like to congratulate you, Mr. Street, on the work to date. You pushed through a lot of things that other leaders couldn't, and has been an asset to the region.
Well, that's incredibly generous of you. But I will just give an example that I think typifies that. The single biggest investment the combined authority has made remains the metro through the Black Country, out from Wednesbury through other parts of Sandwell and down ultimately to Dudley and to Briley Hill. And the diggers are now in the ground, so it's not Never Never Land, it is happening. And people had talked about that for 30 years. But it was just 6 months after I became mayor that we actually got the cash together. And that did involve me literally sitting in Philip Hammond's office when he was Chancellor, sort of saying, I'm not going till I've got it. And then we're doing the works. And I think it's been fascinating. I'm sure we'll come on to this to see the way in which the certainty of that coming has actually helped bring other investment in to places, particularly like Dudley along the line.
We will talk about transport. It's been a key theme in the Black Country over the last few years. But while I've got him, Liam from Edgbaston has asked, do you miss being a regular citizen even? Does part of you want to go back to a non-political life? Or are you ready to finish what you started?
And what an interesting question. I still think I am quite a regular citizen, in some senses. So I still, because I live right in the middle of the city centre, and I still just sort of walk about, jump on the train, the bus, the metro, and I don't feel that I've changed that much in that respect at all, actually. But I hope this isn't an inappropriate thing to say, but it did rather come home to me. Very sadly, my mum died of COVID on the 3rd of February. And I just thought it was a private thing. And people said to me, no, Andy, given the role you're doing, you've got to make this public. So I did just do a little tweet about it, and there were literally thousands of responses. And so I suppose, Ian, I mentioned that because at that point, I did realise it is different. And if you choose to do a job like this, you can't, in a sense, just be completely private and personal. And some things do become more relevant. And actually, that was quite a lesson to me, actually. So, yeah, it was interesting reflection.
My condolences to you. I wasn't aware. And it, I guess it does show you the consequences of being high profile in public life. You had a very high profile job. You was a chief executive of one of the largest retail groups in the country, and you gave that up to become a politician. And There's no other way around it. Being the mayor of the combined authority is a political role. When you look back, you don't seem to have had a significant political history, a politically active history. Where did the idea for being a candidate for the mayor come from?
Yeah, interesting. So I'd always been interested in politics. I did actually study it at university, but that was obviously 30 years ago. And no, I'd never done a political job. I'd never stood for council or anything. So, lots of people said, well, you're interested. Why not be an MP? And I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'd never offered myself for anything. But this job was different, because this job wasn't about serving a party as you do when you become an MP and you're whipped and all that. This was actually, I almost saw it like a sort of executive job. And yes, you stand on a party label. We know we can't organise elections in any other way. And actually, it's right that people know that I am a proud Conservative. But I was very, very clear. My loyalty was only to the people of the West Midlands, not to a political party. So I saw this as a very different type of job. And to be honest, what the bug was for it was for the 5 years before the elections, I'd been chair of something called the Local Enterprise Partnership. Some of your listeners might have heard of. It's an alliance of business people, local councils and universities to actually try to drive the economy of the region. And I'd done that for Birmingham and Solihull. And so I'd been really stuck into the sort of economic performance. And we'd all been there at the birth of the combined authority. And that's, to be honest, what gave me the bug for wanting to do this, because I genuinely felt we could do better.
Of course, then one of the roles of the mayor of the combined authority is to work with the leaders of each of the local authorities that form part of that. How have you found that over the last few years? Has it been an effective working relationship?
So actually, this is something, I'm glad you've asked that question, because it's something I need to say thank you to the leaders for. Because people said at the beginning, well, you're a Conservative mayor. When we started, we only had one Conservative council. All the others were Labour councillors. But actually, I honestly don't think that mattered at all. It's more balanced now. Now Walsall and Dudley are Conservative-led, of course. It's 4 Labour councils, 3 Conservative councils, me as a Conservative mayor. So it's pretty even balanced now. But actually, I think almost because it's even, that's actually made everyone put party politics aside. I've tried to be very non-partisan, work across boundaries. So I would actually say of all of the leaders, we have really tried to work together for the benefit of the region. And I like to think if you walked into a combined authority board and you saw people taking their responsibility for their own areas, because each leader has a specialist area, then you would not say they're a Conservative leader, they're a Labour leader, there's some sort of antagonism. We would all be working on it together. And this is what I mean about we could do better as a region if we work together. And I hope I've tried to build that collaborative environment where we all can.
And May from Dudley asks, for those less in the know, what is the combined authority? How does it work, and how does it, I think, particularly feature in the day-to-day lives of the people who live in the Black Country?
Yeah, great question. So the combined authority is exactly as it sort of says on the tin. So it is the 7 local authorities across the West Midlands. So 4 in the Black Country, Wolverhampton, Dudley, Sandwell and Walsall, then Birmingham, Solihull and Coventry, all together about 3 million people coming together. And then they have 1 directly elected mayor, that's me, and I chair that organisation. And we have a budget per year of, well, it was 900 million for the year coming up. And what are we responsible for? What's directly relevant to people in the Black Country? Well, everything around transport, through Transport for the West Midlands. So the extension of the tram, as we've talked about, the running of working with National Express for the bus operations, rail, So people say to me, if the number 7 bus is late, it's my fault. So direct relevance there. I mean, things like negotiating with National Express, the fares per year, the fact they've been frozen for 4 years, great point. Then, of course, there's everything around where is housing going to be built. I'm not the planning authority. That remains Dudley Council, Wolverhampton Council, whatever. But we do all work together on which sites are going to come forward to be developed. And then a really important thing, we also have responsibility for adult skills. So training and development, getting people back in the right training after the pandemic, that falls to us as well. So there are some particular responsibilities like that. But I would also say, actually, the mayor's about championing the West Midlands in London, getting the best financial deal for the region, indeed, sometimes championing us around the world with international investors. So definitely at the moment, we're having discussions with the Director General of the BBC, for example. That falls to me. It's not written on the job description, but you just sort of step forward to represent the region and hopefully we'll be hearing about investment in that way. And of course, the deal to bring a government department like MXCLG to Wolverhampton, it was me who was there talking with the Secretary of State about doing that. So there's some specific responsibilities, but there's this point about representing us as well. Hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, but thank you very much. And one of the benefits of incumbency in a position like this for an election is obviously you can stand on your record. And Chris Johnston from Howes Owen says he knows the big ticket items, the metro, things like that. But he's asking you what would be your proudest achievement over the last 4 years? Is there something that we might not have heard about, but you're really chuffed by?
Yes, you've probably heard about it, but I do think this is significant. 4 years ago, when we did the campaign, everyone said to me, the thing that shames the West Midlands is the number of people who are rough sleeping on the streets. We had the numbers just recently, and that number has fallen by 75% in 2 years. Now, some of it has been because of brilliant funding by the government. Some of it has been brilliant work by local councils. But in the middle of it, we've put this brilliant scheme that we call Housing First together. And 377 people across the West Midlands have now moved who could have been rough sleepers or were rough sleepers or risk of it into their own accommodation. And actually, we will go into this election with just the count, and I hate that word, it sounds so inhuman, but the way it works, of just 44 people. So actually, we have made enormous progress, much faster progress than other areas of the country. We just had the annual numbers, as I say, ours was down by 62% in 1 year. The national number was 37. So we've made much more progress. And it's a really good example of everybody working together. So that, again, might not have been on the top of the job description, but it is something I genuinely feel we've made a difference on.
Obviously, going forward, housing, the crisis around housing, rough sleepers, it's going to be an ongoing issue for a while. There was a lot of work done during the initial stage of the coronavirus pandemic to get people off the streets, funding it into hotels. But as a more long-term strategy, what would you do as Mayor of the Combined Authority to continue the work that's done by Housing First, which I think is very much a multi-agency and a collaborative model of dealing with housing and not so much about just dealing with the emergency. So from the Mayor's office, what would you like to see as the homelessness strategy?
Yeah, so we do actually need to continue with Housing First, because we need to make sure that those who either do end up rough sleeping or at risk of rough sleeping have a solution. And you're right, Ian, it is very much a collaborative approach. And the particular thing that's made it successful is people in that situation usually have some underlying issue, maybe a mental health issue, maybe an addiction issue. And what happens with anyone on that scheme is they get support workers to address those points as well. So the real success of this scheme is nearly everyone who's gone on it has stayed on it and stayed off the streets. And as I say, we are the pilot for the country for this. It really is unique for the West Midlands. So it's been a great success. But your question is also right. That on its own can't be enough. We've got to also think about the prevention of this. And the biggest prevention of all is making sure there is enough affordable accommodation. So one thing I'm actually very encouraged by is the pace of housing development across the West Midlands. We've doubled the number of homes being built in the last 5 years, up to 17,000 last year and indeed the year before. And really importantly, 20% of those homes are affordable. And we're absolutely clear, anything that the Combined Authority contributes to has to achieve that 20% affordable. So genuinely, there is accommodation that people on basic salaries would be able to afford, either to rent or to move into.
When it comes to defining what affordable housing is, these are discussions that have been going on pretty much since council stopped building council houses. How does somebody, who's 24, 25, just getting on their career, how do they afford to buy a house? How can they afford? I mean, some of the rents are quite extortionate.
So I'm really pleased you've asked that question, because we've actually done some, I think, groundbreaking work on this to change the definition of affordable, particularly to make it affordable for young people on basic pay. Now, let me explain. It sounds like a slightly technical point, but actually it's really important. Nationally, affordable is defined as the price as a percentage of the market price of a house. So if house is usually 250,000, affordable might be 75% of that. But actually, that has got nothing to do with people's salaries. What we've done in the West Midlands, and we only put our money in on the basis of this definition, is say that affordable is going to be pegged to people's salaries. And we say that it is actually, has to be approximately a third of people's salary either going into a mortgage or into rental on whatever property. So I'm sure your listeners will see straight away, it's a huge difference, because the market can go up in terms of house prices, so the definition of affordable goes up in the national situation. In our situation, it can only go up if people's pay goes up. So the whole idea is someone starting off maybe as a new recruit police officer, a nurse, a teacher, that they will be able to afford accommodation on our definition. And I'm actually really pleased we've made that change across the West Midlands.
And in terms of people moving forward, recovering from this pandemic, there's one of the root causes of homelessness is poverty. It's joblessness. So joblessness, educational opportunities. So what would you like to see over the next 4 or 5 years? But again, I'm particularly thinking about younger people, but we also know there will be older people out there who will be potentially having to retrain in new careers. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the brunt of the pandemic has been taken by younger people. That is absolutely true. If you look at the increase in claimants, very much concentration on younger people. But the other age group that's been very badly affected actually is the 50+ age group. So you are right to call that out. So 2 things to say. First of all, we've given a clear commitment, a clear plan of 100,000 new jobs over 2 years. We don't want to wait 4 years. This is urgent. We've got to get on with it. And 100,000 will basically cover the new claimants. So, and what we've done is we said we want those in things that we can see right now, not the never land that requires lots of new investment from government. So we've got a clear jobs plan available on my website for those 100,000 jobs from current sources. So it might be some of the new recruiting areas like the police, health service. It might be, of course, the big construction projects like HS2, like obviously building the Commonwealth Games, but it's also the sectors that are growing rapidly, like the whole sort of electrification of automotive. And what we've also talked about is retraining people who have lost their jobs. And to give you 3 things we're doing there, there's 20,000 work experience opportunities for youngsters through Kickstart available in the West Midlands. There's 10,000 opportunities with our colleges to retrain on what we call sector-based work academy, to actually go into sectors that are growing. So for example, getting training that we need for construction, as we say. And then we're also looking to get people retrained in digital in what we call our digital boot camps, as obviously the biggest growth area. So if you've come out of a sector that maybe hasn't got good prospects, we're looking to offer that retraining. And any young person in the Black Country, by the way, who's looking at what's available there, if you just go online to what we call our youth platform, or if you're in Sandwell or Wolverhampton, we've actually opened physical youth hubs. We just opened it this week at Sandwell College. You can actually go to one place and see all the resources for that retraining in one place. So Ian, we've really tried to pull together that offer so people know what's available. Thanks, Andy. We talked earlier about your previous life as chief executive of the John Lewis Partnership. Now we've seen in the news this week that John Lewis has announced some store closures, that they've struggled as a result of the pandemic and other factors that are affecting many in the high street. And David from Stourbridge, he asks you the question: how does the mayor, how do you see our high streets develop? We know times are changing, but as a man who previously ran a massive department store chain, is there anything that would make him reopen on our high streets? Or is that not the way we're heading? And if not, how do we maintain our streets? A multifaceted question there. Yeah, there's lots in that. So the first bit, maybe I'll just pick up one aspect of it, the John Lewis aspect, then we'll move on from John Lewis. I would never have shut the shop in Birmingham. Now, I know that's not in Stourbridge, but, you know, hopefully Stourbridge residents commuted into the city to go to John Lewis. That was the whole idea of having that shop there. And I still believe very strongly
that a brand like John Lewis has to have presence in big city centres across the country, because you can't just be an online retailer if you've got the whole sort of tradition of service that John Lewis has. So I would never have taken that decision, and if it was me, it would never have happened. But anyway, that's only one aspect of this question. So let's take the question more broadly. I am still a believer that retail is very important in our high streets. You know, retail is not over, it's not all moving online, and particularly local high streets. And actually, if you think of Stourbridge, it's actually a really good example of a vibrant, I know it's challenged, but you know, it is essentially a vibrant local high street, and people do, after the pandemic, want to stay local. And what we're actually seeing, and I'll be honest, particularly in some of our more affluent areas, is opening up of local businesses serving local communities. And that is good. That's a good feature. But it is also true that there'll be less retail in total. So what we've got to think is, what does the high street offer in the future? So it's still a place that people come together. Of course, I've said some retail, but then there'll be more people living on high streets. And this is very important. If you just take West Brom, a really good example, it's a big, long high street. We need to bring more expenditure into it. So there's a scheme the Combined Authority's done to pull down that big old car park at Bull Street. That will be new residential scheme there. Really important to bring people in there. Walsall Town Centre, we're supporting residential into high streets because it brings in that expenditure. But then there's also going to be entertainment, much more sort of leisure and entertainment on our high streets. And a brilliant example, and full credit to Sandwell Council here, the Sandwell Towns deal. They've just got £67 million from government here, and part of it is to bring West Brom Town Hall back as an entertainment place. That too is a good piece for the future of the high street. So there'll be more examples of that. And then the last thing that we need to see is more public services on our high street. Actually, it's where all transport comes to. So it should be the place. Health check-ins, health drop-in centres for scanning, the whole sort of point. One of the lessons of the pandemic is people are not doing this enough. Make it easy, convenient. So what I hope you see from my answer is that there'll be some retail, but there'll also be some other new uses. And we've got to bring those together in a place that's still a focal point for society, in a sense to redevelop high streets, not just try to defend what there is currently, because that is going to be challenged. But remember, local retail is really first class, and that has been given a brilliant shot in the arm in an odd way by the pandemic.
There's also been quite a lot of support, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. Business rates. Is the Mayor in a position to make an argument for maybe a reduction or even a change in business rates to support small and local businesses?
Yeah, categorically, yes. So let's just remember, as you say, the government has already given good support, business rates, holidays, exemptions, all of that. And I was lobbying before the budget for that to continue to be the case, particularly for retail and hospitality, pubs started up. But what I've also been doing is I've been on my bike down to London, as they say, to give evidence to the Treasury Select Committee about how this needs long-term reform. Because I'm really clear, it is not right that a retail business on Stourbridge High Street is paying very expensive business rates, and an online fulfillment centre down the road away from the high street is paying a lot lower business rate. That is not right. It needs radical reform. And if I'm honest, the government, they might be my party, but they put this off for too long. And actually the pandemic should have brought them to table to get on with this in a much more decisive way. So yeah, I'm still making the case for that to happen.
Going to move on to transport in a bit. But before we do, your song choice to finish the show off?
My song choice, yeah. There could be lots, but the one I want to go for is Heather Small and Pride. And the reason I want to go for that is because obviously the Commonwealth Games is coming to the West Midlands next year. And I hope it will induce an enormous sense of pride. And this song absolutely stuck in my mind after the closing ceremony at the London Olympic Games, which was, I think everyone would agree, a wonderful 2 years for Britain in every sense. You know, we brought the world, in that case, to London, and we showed them at the very best of Britain. We also won a few medals, which helped everyone's attitude to it. And I actually think that the Commonwealth Games will be a similar opportunity for us to show everyone just what has happened here. And remember, there are events across the whole of the West Midlands. It's not just the Birmingham Games. That wonderful aquatic centre in Sandwell, you know, stunning. And the legacy that's going to be brought. So in a sense, that song sums up to me what we want to feel next year.
And of course, success does breed success, and there was plenty of success post the 2012 Olympics. You're hoping for the same out of the Commonwealth Games next year?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. So let's just think. I think there's three ways that success will be left. That swimming pool in Sandwell, they call it the aquatic centre. By the way, I call it a swimming pool. That's what I think local people will call it. That's a wonderful facility that's going to be left for residents there. But then the second way in which I hope success will be left is I hope lots of people will have come forward to volunteer and indeed to get jobs, part of the jobs plan. About 6,000 jobs we're aiming for in the Commonwealth Games, already jobs in the construction of it. And anyone who comes forward to volunteer, I want them to get a basic qualification that they maybe then be able to take on to something else. They didn't do that in London, we can do better. And then of course, the third way it will leave success, we are going to be having an international sort of promotion of West Midlands business. That was done in London. We can do it even better. And my goodness, we need that after the pandemic. So there will definitely be some really good leftovers, you might call them, legacy might be the other word, of the Games.
You've mentioned it a few times, and I think because it is relevant to many other elements, but the world-class transport system, I have spent some time working up in Manchester and can see the work they've done, and I can see parallels of what's trying to be done in the West Midlands. But we have had a comment from Steve Edwards about building on greenbelt whilst being in support of HS2. He says that's contradictory, that HS2 is destroying greenbelt.
Okay, so what Steve's probably referring to is I have a very strong policy of what we call brownfield first for housing, and we've given a very clear commitment with the councils that we will not build on, for example, the greenbelt all around Dudley, whether it be essentially Gornwall right round to Halesoe in Stourbridge, and similarly in Walsall, in the whole sort of Feasey and Aldridge areas as well. So, and we're doing that. We're bringing derelict land back to use for housing there. Now, HS2. Steve's right. There is some green belt take for HS2 in Solihull, actually, in particular around Arden Cross. And I do support that. And I need to be honest with people. And I have never said never to game-changing takes of the green belt. And it's not just for, let's just say, a housing estate extension, as the proposals are around the Black Country. This is for a piece of transport infrastructure that I believe will be a huge advantage to the West Midlands for the next century, basically. And I do have to stand up and be counted on that. And I know it's a tough decision. And I do also know that some say that the greenbelt take, and indeed some of the woodland that it's being destroyed by it, is tragic. And I understand that. HS2 are committed to build back far more trees than they cut down, to be clear. But I do also appreciate it will take time for that to mature. So I'm not denying it's a tough decision, but I genuinely believe that HS2 is that sort of game-changing investment for us. And that's why I have supported it, despite what I accept from Steve is a difficult challenge.
Thanks very much, Andy. We'll talk about transport now, because I think it does tie into redevelopment of town centres. Dudley Town Centre has been earmarked for significant funding of what do they call it now, the interchange?
Yes, the interchange.
The bus station, the extension of the metro, and also the investment in very light rail at Castle Hill. I just read this comment though. Does all this coming into Dudley, the bus station, the metro, very light rail, is this just an opportunity to take people away from Dudley elsewhere rather than bring them in?
No, certainly not. If you think of what's happening in Dudley, the metro was the first commitment, and let's just work along the metro line as it comes into Dudley now. First of all, the Black Country Living Museum, huge expansion there. What a destination. Then you come to the Institute of Technology. That is going to be one of the best technical colleges in the country. People will come in for that. Then you move to the very light rail, genuine innovation there, past Castle Hill, and then you go up obviously to Portersfield and the interchange. So there's residential there that probably would never have been justified without that transport investment. And of course, we now know from the council there's going to be a brilliant leisure facility. I think they've gone public talking about the ice rink as part of that. And of course, they're also talking about a university campus. So that is a classic of bringing people in. So you take those 6 things along the line, and of course, in the background, the castle and the zoo. So I would say all those things will bring people into Dudley. Of course, some residents will use the metro to go to jobs elsewhere, but absolutely, at the moment, you cannot, apart from a bus service, which isn't the fastest, we know that. You cannot move onto the national rail network. You will be able to through the metro connecting up. So I genuinely think it's brought that investment in, and that's the whole idea of what transport's supposed to do.
Now, I'm afraid we only have a few minutes left. We have had a comment from Shahid in Netherton. Yesterday, I bought my first tickets for a live event. It's at the Birmingham Hippodrome later this year. It really was quite exciting. I haven't done that for a while. But Shahid says it's Dudley Council is not offering a lifeline to the Dudley Hippodrome. You may be aware of it, the bottom of Castle Hill. This is in favour of a university campus. The question is, do you have a long-term plan for investment in the arts post-coronavirus? It seems like something is cast aside, but nothing in its place.
Yeah, I think this is a very good and important question, and it's actually particularly relevant to Dudley, because let's face it, Wolverhampton's got some good facilities, the Grand, and indeed in Walsall, lovely museum. So I think and of course we've already talked about West Brom Town Hall coming back. So this is a particular issue in Dudley, and the answer is yes. So when we got all the money from government, it was called Cultural Recovery Fund, and some went to the Birmingham Hippodrome that you've just mentioned. It was very clear that very little of it went to the Black Country. So I actually spoke immediately to the CEO of the Arts Council England for the West Midlands and said, this isn't right. We need more facilities in the Black Country. And he said to me, okay, Andy, you make the proposal of what we should be doing, and then we will support that. So the door is open, Ian, for us to think what we wish to propose. And that is a conversation that's very live. And I think it's a fair call out that although lots of progress has been made, we do, particularly in Dudley, actually, need to be making more progress on cultural venues. Brilliant museum at the Black Country Living Museum, of course, but we're talking about live events that can be more investment. So the door is open, and I think I called it out rightly a few months ago when we saw the Cultural Recovery Fund.
Campaigners for the Hippodrome in Dudley have often argued that the door is not open to them, that they haven't had the support from the local council and from sort of wider the business community and the West Midlands Combined Authority. Before a final decision is made to knock down that, would you be interested in meeting with them to discuss what could be done to keep this building open?
So I have met with the number of them individually before, and at events that I've done, they've come and made their case. But I think we have to be really clear. This is a Dudley Council decision, Ian, and I don't want to give people sort of the impression that I could take a different decision, because it genuinely is a Dudley Council decision. I said this publicly the other day. Some will disagree with me, but please, I think I must again put my money where my mouth is. I actually think the concept of a university facility for Dudley is incredibly exciting. It propels a town into the sort of Premier League, really, if you get that university facility. So I actually think that the council are right to be pursuing that. But I've given you a clear answer about the cultural facilities that we have got to win for Dudley.
You have opened a can of worms there with the Premier League, because Dudley, of course, is one of the largest towns without a professional football club or speedway. And we have come to the end of time. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.